It's time for the Double Stop with Brian Sword.
Welcome to the Double Stop Podcast. I'm Brian Sword. This week, I'm talking to legendary producer Keith Olsen. Let's just do a short little run through of a few of the bands he's worked with. Fleetwood Mac, Ozzy, Grateful Dead, Whitesnake, Heart, Santana, Foreigner, Journey. It's just a massive, massive list. This is the story of Keith Olsen. So I always kind of start the same way, is where were you born and what kind of musical family did you grow up in?
Okay, I was born in South Sioux Falls, South Dakota. There wasn't much music in my family. My sister can barely carry a tune in a bucket. My father couldn't. My mother, she could play one song on the piano, and that was it. So it wasn't really there. There was a guy that I got really into performance and playing learning a little bit about as many instruments as I can because of a teacher in my high school, and he was he's dead now, but he was really, really instrumental, shall we say, in pointing me in the directions of learning instruments, learning theory, and then learning the voice, because it's all about the voice. That's what he said. It's all about the voice, and he couldn't be more right, because the voice tells the story. Voice gives the listener the message and the melody.
Coming from a non-musical family, were they supportive when you started going down that path?
Oh yeah. I told my dad once that if I ever played the Hungry Eye in San Francisco, I would have known I would have made it. and before he died, I did play the Hungry Eye, and no, I had made it at that time. I was still playing bass in a backup band for Gail Garnett.
And how long did you pursue bass?
Oh, I played bass all through, from, let's see. It was my senior year of high school through my first 2 years of college.
And when you were in college, were you studying music or something else?
I was studying, I had a dual major. I had music ed and electronics, E minor. And then I flipped it around, E major and music minor. And the tests were exactly the same. So it didn't mean anything. And then 2 years in, I got a very interesting offer to go out on the road, play bass for a star folk singer.
And who was that?
That was Jimmy Rogers. Remember Kisses Sweeter Than Wine and Honeycomb and all that stuff? He was doing Hootenanny tour in the upper Midwest, and there's a flyer with phone number to call that was put up in the music department of in the music ed building of the University of Minnesota. It was just on the bulletin board. I saw it, pulled off the number, called it, and auditioned and got the job. Well, I was hired to back Jimmy Rogers for a 21-day tour. And that that was one of the turning points, because I left school to go on the road. I met so many people that were just so instrumental in forming music of our time. I mean, it was Cass Elliot and Tim Rose and John Phillips and Gail Garnett. I met there, and during the same tour, and I also met Sean Bonniwell, and so I became really pretty good friends with Cass Elliot, and then Gail Garnett asked me to go on the road with her as soon as we finished this tour, to be her bassist. So after Jimmy Rogers, I floated right in, going on the road with Gail Garnett. And then Gail, they went off and got on a plane to New York. The next thing we knew, she had a record deal. The next thing we knew, we had a record going up the charts. And it Sing in the Sunshine, and went to #1 and won a Grammy that year. So we were, we were a folk trio, and we had a pop hit, which was hardly pop, and we tried to replicate the pop hit with a 12-string and acoustic bass and her singing. So when people came to see Gail Garnett, they were expecting to hear the single, and we couldn't replicate it. But we got on a bunch of really cool tours, with one with Four Seasons, and then we had this guy named this comedian opening the show for us. That was really cool on that tour. His name was, it was Bill Cosby, believe it or not, and he was opening.
Holy crap.
I know, and so I was meeting all these people, and it was just, what a wonderful time. And then Cass Elliot formed the Mugwumps, which became the Mamas and Papas. And so when I was playing with Gail and we got into Washington, D.C., Mugwumps were playing at this club just up the street, and we were in this other folk club down the street, and Cass came down and kidnapped me about 30 minutes before one of our shows and said, "You got to hear this set," and put me down in a seat right in the middle and said, "No, don't you leave." And they played these songs and the harmony with the feel and everything, which became Mamas and Papas. 2 months later, they changed their name, but they were playing those songs, going, "Holy crap, this is great!" Put chills on my arms, And it's the early years of folk music when folk became rock, pop. It was that transitional time when when the Byrds did. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man and 8 Miles High. It was, they were folk guitarists for, this folk duo. They were the backup guitarists, and they just decided to form this band, and they were called, they were called the Jet Set, and I heard them as the Jet Set, and then all of a sudden they changed their name to the Byrds, and it was stunning. So it was, all of that was going on, and the West Coast music scene in Los Angeles was unbelievable. Everybody talked to everybody. There was communication amongst artists. There was respect amongst artists. Everybody invited everybody to everybody else's recording sessions, and it was a stunningly cool time in L.A. And out of that, I formed with Sean Bodywell. We formed this rock group called the Music Machine, and dyed our hair black and put on black clothes and wore black gloves and played real fast and real hard and extremely loud. And it became, I'll call it late 60s punk music. And Talk Talk became a hit nationally.
What led you to go from folk music to something so heavy? Or was folk music simply the opportunities you had and...
Oh, that was the opportunity, but there was a change happening. During the whole time that there was folk music, all these guys were looking about plugging in. And as they plugged in, they turned up, and it became a natural progression. Because when you're playing acoustic instruments, you had to be pretty good. I mean, look at yeah. Guitar players that were back then. Oh, geez, they were really good. I mean, Stephen Stills, David Crosby, they were really good. And so,
yeah.
And they were just great acoustic guitar players. And so all of a sudden they started plugging in, and it became an automatic. It became folk rock, or whatever they called it back then. But it was that transition, and that took me to the next transition, which was, I'm saying, well, gee, what if we turned up even louder? You know, it was experimentation, and the experiment worked, and we had a hit record, and we got signed. We toured all over the place, and from that, I met some people. I met this band called Eternity's Children down in the South, and their manager asked me to record them, and so all of a sudden I kind of took over the producer role and recording another band. I also was kind of taking over the producer role of the Music Machine too. But then that band summarily broke up over greed. You know, it always happens. You know, every band that breaks up, it's because of greed. And it's usually over writing, publishing, or tour money.
Yeah, some things never change.
It never changes. It's the same today as it was back then. So the band broke up. We all went our separate ways, and I went off and started learning a craft. I wasn't a very good engineer. I needed to learn the palette, and Joe Gottfried at Sound City Studios gave me the opportunity to learn the craft. And so he gave me the keys to the studio and said, if you'll be there when I need you, I'll give you the keys and you can record your things there at night when it's not being used. Well, Sound City back then was not being used by very many people, and so I started cutting a lot of things. I signed these 3 acts to my little production company. And one was Waddy Wachtel as a solo artist. And so I signed Waddy Wachtel, Jorge Calderon, and Jorge won all the Grammys a couple of years ago for producing Warren Zevon's album. And the third band that I signed was this duo that came out of this band Fritz out of San Francisco or San Jose area called Buckingham Nicks. Lindsey Buckingham and Stephanie Nicks. So as the story goes, now we're all the way into the 70s, and I recorded their album, and Polygram or Polydor, whoever it was one of those polys back then. Pressed 35,000 copies and put about $1 in promotion. And the album just sat there, and they didn't get picked up for a second album. But the album was really good, and it was unique, and it was different. It had these, this 2-part harmony that was force and it was different. It had different colors in it. It had really great expertise in every single thing, from drums to bass to the guitar parts, keyboard parts, to everything. The arrangement, everything was really, really cool. And then along comes Mick Fleetwood looking for a studio and somebody to work with them on their new album. And he heard about me and Sound City, so he called me and set a time to come out and see me. It was late in December. And I showed him the studio. I played him Frozen Love off the Buckingham Nicks album. He liked what he heard. He said, wow, this was all cut here. I said, yep, everything. And we made a deal for me to engineer and co-produce the next Fleetwood album with, and the lineup with Bob. It had Bob Welch in it. New Year's Eve, they were going to play someplace. He calls me, says, that that album we were going to do in February, March. Remember, back then, albums took 8 to 10 weeks to do. If you were an independent producer engineer, you would reserve that time. You'd tell everybody else, no, I'm busy. So if they cancel, 4 weeks before going into, you're out of work. And when you're out of work back then, you're not going to pay your rent or your car payment or buy food. So it was kind of shocking when Bob Welch quit the band. But then Mick said, but that guitar player that was in that band, the duo that you played me, do you think he'd want to join the band? And I said, well, they're together, and it would probably have to be both. And he thought about it for a second, and then he said, could you ask him to see if they want to join the band? And so on New Year's Eve, I went to Stevie and Lindsay's house and talked him into joining Fleetwood Mac. Took about 5 hours, and they said they'd only give it a try for 8 weeks. Okay, well, shall we say it was Mick's best decision ever to ask for both Stevie and Lindsay, and it was
no kidding.
His best decision ever, saying yes, they'll try it. So anyway, we went in the studio and we cut that album, the Fleetwood Mac album, and that was where my life really changed, because I had a record that was selling 200,000 copies a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it, soared. It didn't soar. It gradually climbed the charts, gradually, and it was on the charts for, I don't know, what was it, 40 or 50 weeks? It was a really long time. And in fact, no, it wasn't. It was on the charts for maybe 100 weeks. I'd have to look it up. But anyway, so I have my life before the Fleetwood Mac album and after the Fleetwood Mac album. Just like Tom Petty had his life before Damn the Torpedoes and after the Damn the Torpedoes. Just like Dave Grohl had his life before Nevermind and after Nevermind. And all of those things happened in that one studio, which was Sound City. That's why that movie, Sound City, is out, and Dave Grohl did such a great job of telling the story of that studio and that console, because it was a very special place. And I'm telling you, the communication and the everything, the rapport amongst artists that were working in the front studio, the back studio, getting together after their sessions and jamming. And I mean, it was an indelible imprint on defining the genre and what was going to be the next 2 decades of pop music, 70s and 80s. I mean, it was indelible. That's where it happened.
Obviously, instantly you're getting offers then. You're the hot producer.
It's kind of instantly. You get a call from Clive Davis and you go, yes, sir, Mr. Davis, anything you want, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he is the king, and it's good to be king, but you always talk to the king. And so King asked me to produce the Grateful Dead. And all I can say is, holy crap. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, because I had heard the band, I had heard a couple of songs, and you don't say no to Clive. When he asks you to do something, you do it because by Davis. He is a career maker, and so I did everything I could to make the Grateful Dead semi-commercial by doing Terrapin Station.
And what were they like in the studio?
Oh my God. not like any other artist ever.
Yeah?
I mean, the stories would go on for hours and hours. It was quite a time. They had a crew. They had a nutritionist in the studio.
Really?
Oh yeah, because they knew, the band was a business, and the roadie, Parrish, had as much say as Garcia did, because they were a business and everybody had a vote, so, and that's why it worked, because everybody was an equal partner. So when one guy went off, it was like, oh, wait a minute, there's all these other guys to pick up the slack. So it was, because of that, they had a meeting that said, well, when we're in the studio, sometimes we do too many drugs and we don't take care of ourselves very well. So let's bring the nutritionist with us, and she can cook and present at least one healthy meal a day, so we won't get ill and survive the ordeal. I think I'm giving you a hint about what it was like in the studio.
Yeah.
Now, Buddy Miles was in the B studio at Sound City with his band in the back studio, and well, I couldn't get everybody in the Grateful Dead to stay in the studio. I'd get the drummer in the studio, I'd get the other drummer in the studio. By the time I got both the drummers in the studio, the bass player would have drifted off. By the time I got the bass player back in the studio, the keyboard player would have drifted off, and then Weir would have drifted off someplace, and then Garcia couldn't be found, and then I found the two of them. So I told the roadie, I said, what are we going to do? He said, well, I got an idea. So he got out a bunch of nails, and he got everybody inside, and he nailed the doors shut from the inside to keep everybody from going over to see Buddy Miles and talk with him, and because his band was on PCP also during that, and so it was.
Oh man.
Oh God, and one day, Jerry ran out, and so he sent his road crew out to meet with the dealer, and so and this was the night when the nutritionist had made meatloaf, and plates and this giant meatloaf in this pan with the ketchup and the brown sugar topping, tomato sauce on with brown sugar topping. Yeah. So when they took the nail out of the door to go out to get in their car and go, all of a sudden down the hall I hear Buddy Miles going, I'm going to go see my very best friend, Mr. Jerry Garcia. Garcia hears this, and he looks at me and he says, tell him I'm busy, and I'm on the phone, and I can't stop and talk to him. So only Sound City had a telephone in the studio part of the studio. So he ran out and picked up the phone and pretended he was talking. And so Buddy Miles came into the studio, said, where's Jerry? And I said, I was trying to come up with a story. So I said, look, man, now remember, this is meatloaf night. He had asked the nutritionist if he could have a slice of meatloaf. And the nutritionist said, sure, let me get you a plate and fork. And he says, oh, no, that's okay. I can handle it. And he picks it up with his right hands. And he's gnawing it as he's walking down the hall. Meatloaf. Now, you know what's on his hand, right?
Yeah.
Topping, and he's gnawing on it. And he gets into the studio, and I look at him, and I say, well, you can't talk to Jerry now. He's on the phone with Jane Fonda. She wants him to direct her next film. Now, how bizarre is that? And he goes, okay, well, I won't bother him then. And he takes and puts the meatloaf in his left hand and pats me on the shoulder saying, Keith, I just tell you, I'm so happy you're working with my very best friend, Mr. Jerry Garcia. Later that night, everybody's just been laughing at me all night. Later that night, I'm smelling meatloaf. Every time I turn around, I'm smelling meatloaf. And I go and I look in the mirror. Here's his handprint on the back of my shirt. and let me tell you, Buddy Mouse had a hand that is, probably, I don't know, 11 inches from thumb to little finger. I mean, it's big.
Paw.
It's big, and so it covered my entire shirt. But that was the way every night was. It was something, and it went that went on for 3 months like that, and it was. I don't know how I got the album done. It was always something.
And then after that, there's a long string, right?
Well, yeah. From that, it went from that to Santana, to Pat Benatar, to a Foreigner, of course. Before that, it was
and Alice Cooper.
Yeah, there was the thing with Alice Cooper. I was helping out my buddy who was producing a band for the first time, and he asked me to help it. And he said, "There's no money in it, but will you at least engineer it for me?" So I engineered the tracks for him. And it was Alice. And the producer, who I was helping out, is David Foster. Later on, I got to use David Foster to do string charts when he was a pretty big-time producer already. I said, David, you owe me. It was one of those things. I mean, to give you an example, we all were celebrating David Foster's birthday at his house. And Leland Sklar was there, and Ayrton Marrera, the percussionist, was there, and Waddy was there, and Jim Keltner was there, and we looked at him and said, God, we got a great band in this house right now. And they looked at everybody and they went, uh-huh. And so we thought, so Leland says, why don't we cut a track? And I'm going, here it is, 11 o'clock at night. We're at a party, and we all hop in different cars. We drive out to Sound City. I unlock the doors. And Jim Keltner had called his cartage company and had the cartage there. He had called, they had called Ayrton's cartage company, the Latin percussionist, the Brazilian percussionist, Ayrton Marrera. And we just cut a groove that was stunning. And it was just for fun. And that's what we did back in those days. We had all these musicians in one room having fun. So that's what it was like. I mean, a lot of that's gone today.
After that particular run of records, let's jump up to Whitesnake. I'm very curious about the Slide It In record. When that came to you, that was the UK version, right? And then you did some re-recording and...
Yeah, I did a whole bunch of re-recording on it, a whole bunch, and added a bunch of guitar parts and then did a couple new vocals and stuff like that, and then pulled it together, got rid of all there was some out of tune stuff on it, some junk on it, and stuff like that I replaced. And David and John Kolodner gave me free rein, and so we, I just took it, did it. They said, "Yep, sure, okay," and I got it done in 3 weeks, something like that.
Oh, and, really?
Yeah, it was, and so that album came out and it went gold, which was pretty interesting that it went gold. And it was at the point where, Coverdale was a bit of a name because of that, because it went gold.
Mm-hmm.
And so he put together this band, you know, just the right guys to go out on the road a little bit, and then he made some money on the road. Then decided to go in the studio to do the next Whitesnake record.
Yeah, the 1987.
Yeah, the 87 version. And they went in because John Sykes didn't like my guitar tone, so he wanted to do it up at Little Mountain Studios with Mike Stone. So they cut the tracks up at Little Mountain with Mike Stone. And then it was Mike Stone then told David Coverdale that he will never sing again because he was singing out of tune. He says, "You're a terrible singer." That's the you never say that to a singer. If he's singing out of, you say, "What can I do to help?" Because you must be hearing yourself correctly. You know, there's got to be something that I'm doing, and always take the blame yourself, because the singers are a fragile bunch. You know, you've got to always pump them up, never say they're wrong. And so,
like an actor.
Yeah, they're, you know, you've heard of LSD, lead singer disease.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a real disease. I have a bunch of lead singers that will testify that it's a real disease. Anyway, so they cut these tracks, and you know, Sykes did all these guitar parts with harmonizers, printed harmonizers, because to him the guitars sounded huge. Well, okay, but they were, you know, one channel was 9 cents sharp of the other channel, and when you're singing, oh my God, where's pitch center? Pitch center is above 440. And then the beginning of every chord, when you're a guitar player and you hit that chord hard, it's sharp at first with the attack edge. It goes sharp and then settles into the pitch. You know, that's why great guitars they actually let the instrument generate the power instead of hitting it hard. Well, so playing in tune is always a bit of an issue for power guitar players, and you know, you have to be really you have to attack it really perfectly, or it goes too sharp. And when you start having it sharp and then it settles into the pitch, the singer, where is he going to do pitch center? And so with these harmonizers printed on within these tracks, everything was out of tune. Just a little out of tune, but enough to do with pitch for Coverdale. So so Kolodner said, "Keith, you got to help me." And I said, "Okay, I'll take it and let me just run with it." And so I took it and went through the 14 or 16 tracks of guitar and found the 2 that were in tune and put together a slave reel that Coverdale, everything was pitched correctly. I redid most of the bass because the bass was sharp. And I did the bass with, believe it or not, keyboard with Bill Como.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Bill Como, the keyboard player. He used a DX7 and a Prophet VS, MIDI'd together. That's early MIDI, remember, it's 87 with a MIDI cable. Do things, and it gave this tone color that sounded really great, and he played perfectly, and it was always bright in tune. It was doom, 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 doom. And then the slides were boom. He was using the bar, you know, the pitch bar.
Yeah.
I used keyboard bass on several of the songs. And then on a couple of songs when I needed a really in-tune, chunky guitar part, I used Ann Huff, and he played on it. And God, he made it sound great, because he would run in, plug his guitar into my Marshall JMP 100 with my 2x12 cabinets in another room, and he would just go choo, 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 and it would be perfectly in tune. It would be perfectly in time, and he'd be done. And Coverdale would look at me and go, "Oh, that didn't take long." And I said, "No." And then for backgrounds, I used Richard Page, who was the lead singer in Mr. Mister. And,
oh, right, yeah.
And I can't remember if I used Tom Kelly and Richard Page, both, or if it was just Richard Page. But we had a great, perfectly sung backgrounds, because, Page, my God, he's great. Anything that Sykes wouldn't sing on, we used Richard. But John was, and David were having problems by then. But then I mixed the record, and...
wasn't David coming off a legitimate vocal problem heading into that album?
Yes. He had hurt his voice on the tour, and, let's face it, he's been a rock and roll singer forever, and he really stretched his vocal cords to sing really high, and put that on every note. And so he developed the beginning of a node. So he had surgery on it, and so he was coming off that because it was one of those things where you have to be really careful.
And then when Mike Stone made some comments on the singing, he would be especially sensitive at that point then.
Yes.
How did you work with him on that coming off that surgery?
It was easy. What you do is you set up 3 mics. You get the headphones sounding so good that when a singer or a vocalist walks up to the mic and he goes, it sounds bigger than life in the can. And so, first off, that's A. B, you make sure that what he's hearing is perfectly in tune, every single track, so he doesn't have to worry about pitch center. All he has to do is perform. And then you put 3 mics up and you tell him, "Okay, David, what song? Let's attack the hardest song first." And he goes, "Oh, Keith, you're such a demanding person." And we did "Still of the Night."
Yeah.
First. And I had 3 mics set up, and I said, "David, I want you to just give me 3 performances. I'm going to change the mics in between the performances, then I'll be able to know which mic is your mic." I never changed. I used my A mic. They were just sitting. But he thought he had lost all the pressure was off. These were just trial runs. So after the 3 takes, I said, "Okay, David, come on in. We're done." He said, "What?"
So 3 tracks on that vocal, and that's it, and you had it.
Yeah, and I comped it, and we were done.
And of course, his confidence is back in full after that, and away he goes.
Well, we had a celebration dinner that night at La Dome, and David said, "Okay, it's so wonderful. I have my first vocal down, and I have all the confidence in the world." And I said, "Great." So we went to La Dome. That's when he met Tony that night. So it was an amazing, bottom line is he met Tony and we didn't get our celebration dinner. And so Brian Fourick and I went to All American Burger down the street.
Good or bad, his life was changed that night.
Oh yeah, but his life changed that night. But everybody's life changed a little bit when that album came out.
And it was so huge.
Well, we sold to date maybe 23 million, 24 million
Yeah.
copies. It's nuts how many it sold. It's an amazing record. It still has legs today.
Oh yeah, it still sounds great.
Yeah, and it's and David and I email back and forth. I don't know, every couple of 3 weeks. I mean, he is such a good guy, and he is thankful for what has happened in his life. He is a wonderful person, an extremely talented singer, songwriter, performer. I mean, it just doesn't get any better. And he's just that wonderful guy. There's a few artists that I've worked with that just stand out, and he is one of them.
Now, when you work together again on the next one, it seems like this is a band that's always got kind of conflict and issues, or some kind of roadblock. Again, with Vandenberg's Hand.
Well, here was the problem. Adrian, it was, he was trying to do things that were outside of his level of expertise. And he was not able to move his hand because of the carpal tunnel in his left hand. He didn't know it was carpal tunnel. He just noticed that he was having trouble playing the riffs that he wanted to play.
Mm-hmm.
So, Coverdale just told Klink, the parts aren't good enough. They're just not well done. And that's when, once again, I got jumped into the middle of this mess. And Mike is such a good guy, and we get along really well. And so we decided to work on it together. And
okay.
And then Kalodner said, "I want to have Steve Vai in the band," and he kind of forced the issue. He made it well worth Steve Vai's getting into the band. And Steve was, he's such a good guitar player, my God.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, give me a break. Can this guy do anything wrong? He is so inventive. Sometimes it's too inventive, but wow, it's good. Everything he's done is good. And so he brought in the band, and they took away all the guitar parts and just cleaned the slate and started over again.
And were you there for those recordings, or did he take it to his own studio?
Klink was in Steve Vai's little studio, and there was no room other than it's big enough to have a guitar player and his engineer and Mike Klink. That was it. Anybody else in there got, so that was what it was, and that's how we went on from there.
And Coverdale's hinted that there's high quality demos of all the original tracks with Vandenberg, and that he's hinting at someday he'll release it. Do those really exist?
Yes, they do.
And are they they sound great?
They sound they're different. They're very different. When he says high quality demos, he could take all the original, all the vocals that we did to Steve Vai's tracks, because they're the same tracks, and so he lift that off and sync them in to the old demos with the old vocals that they did at Granny's house. Now, I got to tell you a short story. When they were writing this album, they were writing it at 6,800 feet above sea level, David's house. Air is much thinner there. And so it's much easier to hit high notes as a vocalist. Okay, comes down to sea level to sing the vocal, and all of a sudden there's some notes that he can't hit. So, and it's a little late to change key. So That's why some of the high quality demos that they did up there in rehearsal studio up there in Incline Village are going to be different, and some of them are really good. Some of them are really good.
Oh, I hope he releases that stuff. That'd be great.
You know, it's good for his fans to do it.
Oh, totally. The Ozzy record. How was working on that record for you?
It was when Zach came in the band. Let me tell you, here's a kid who day one in the studio, he has a grin. Now, if you can imagine Zach Wild as a child, because he was when he first joined the band. How old was he? Like 19? Wasn't he 19 or 20?
Yeah, 18 or 19.
He was really young, and he had a grin from ear to ear because he's playing in his heroes band. In fact, he's the lead guitar player in Ozzy Osbourne band. And so, let me tell you, he's sitting on this stool, you know, playing this guitar, and we rolled the first day. I couldn't keep my eyes off him. He was so animated the way he played, and with this grin on his face. Instantly, the tracks came to life. Instantly. I mean, every one of the tracks with Zach, it was just, wow. And he's like just on fire. And it showed how good he was and what attitude on a guitar says to a microphone. It was stunningly cool. And those sessions were so much fun because of Zach and how much fun he gave. And Ozzy's singing was, you know, that's Ozzy. You know, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, sure.
Because you never know who you're going to get. Dr. Jekyll or Ozzy. No, it was really I enjoyed doing that. And the mixing came out really good.
You have so many records that I have to kind of cherry pick a little bit, but on the Lynch Mob record, it was an interesting record because George Lynch came from Dokken. He did Wiccan Sensation. They definitely moved away from the Dokken sound. Things didn't work out with Oni Logan, and then they went back in with Robert Mason, and then this record seems to be a little more towards the Dokken side, but with the horns and that kind of stuff.
Well, it was a pop record. It was a pop rock record. You know, Tangled in the Web, we tried to make it a single. You know, and that's why we did the horns and the, you know, all that stuff on it. It was, we tried to do, you know, it was, and it was a success as far as, you know, getting the Lynch Mob some sales and some where he could write it. Robert Mason was a great singer, but he had an issue in the beginning. He was very intimidated in the studio. So we so I brought in Glenn Hughes to sing with him. And Glenn Hughes just eased that guy's and molded Robert, and where he would sing it once, then Robert would sing it, and then he would get off the mic and Robert would sing it, and then all of a sudden he's just going like this with his thumbs up, and Robert's singing great. And that's why Robert became Ozzy's background singer shortly thereafterwards, because he's such a great singer.
Now, how is it like working with him again recently?
Oh yeah, it was fun. It was great working with him. He's a consummate professional. We're trying to work on something again.
We're kind of coming up towards the end of our time here, so let's take it up to a bit more what's happening today. What kind of work are you working on these days?
Believe it or not, I'm doing some EDM, some dubstep. I mean, I'm enjoying life. Really, I'm working with young artists doing some electronic music, but I'm putting, you know, I can't just do electronic music. I have to have that edge of some chunky guitars along with it. So it's my version of EDM. So it's EDM rock, and it's real fun. I've been doing it for the last year. I did a band, an indie band called the Monks of Melonwa from Australia 18 months ago, and they're just now starting to pound into the American market. So they're coming back, and we're going to do some more tracks shortly.
I talked to a lot of producers, and it seems the big thing these days is everybody's got home studios and just enjoying the process of working at home. Is that what you do now, or do you still go to rent out a studio?
I have a wonderful mixing room here in the house where I do vocals and mix. Nothing loud. Drums and everything else, I go to a studio. I mix here. I've got a massive Pro Tools rig. I've got an Icon, a design console. I've got racks of analog gear, and it's just. And I sit here and I work right here. End up working sometimes 6 days a week, sometimes 7. A lot of remixing for people, and they come to me to do that, and it's great because I can just sit here and never leave home, So,
yeah.
But that's what I'm doing now. Yeah, so it's I thought I'd do the whole gamut, go from folk music to EDM, with a few little things in between, like pop and rock and metal and the gamut. It's funny. Music of all genres can be really, really cool. You get into it and you see where there's all this creativity coming from, and it's stunning. And that's what I like to do. Is I like to create stuff, music, and connect listeners with messages.
It must be nice not to be pigeonholed into any particular style.
I've tried to not be that my entire career. That's why I went from Santana to Benatar to Foreigner to Rick Springfield to Ozzy. There was wow. There's a bunch of other bands in between that were, it's all just, there's only 12 notes. And it's just another combination of order of those 12 notes and how you're going to put the feel together around it.
And there it is, my conversation with Keith Olsen. So much more great albums that he's worked on, and any bands that are looking to work with him, I'd check out keitholsenproductions.com. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and follow on Twitter @TheDoubleStop. We'll see you next Monday.